All right, we're starting our series of messages, or at the beginning of our series of messages called the Jesus Project People. The Jesus Project People is the follow-up to the Jesus Project. The Jesus Project was a 3-year sort of engagement with the things that Jesus said and did in the Gospels, trying to understand as best as we possibly could those things that he said, understood what he meant by those things, and try to follow him a little bit better if we could. If we could understand him better, we felt like we could get to follow him just a little bit better. The Jesus Project People is going to be about a year long, and we're going to talk through all of the things that it takes to then, as a community of men and women, actually try to live in relationship with one another as we try to live out the things that Jesus asked us to do. And so the way that Jesus asked us to live means that we've got to change some things about our behavior, about kind of what's natural to us, what our inclination is, and the directions that we want to move, because Jesus and the gospel, the good news, actually pushes back on that. And so we've talked for 4 weeks about love one another. We talked about that. That was incredibly important. That is actually the first sort of commandment that Jesus gave to his disciples. The biggest commandment that he gave to his disciples was, look, if you do nothing else, love one another. In a sense, everything that we're going to say for the rest of the year is commentary on that truth. In a sense, everything else that we're going to talk about is just commentary from the New Testament writers. Love one another, and because you love one another, here are some of the ways that we expect you to behave. Here are some of the things that we ask you to do. The one that we're going to talk about this morning and next week, because it's going to take a couple of weeks, is this idea of we are called to bear with one another. To bear with one another. Most of you know, I've been a CrossFit coach at my gym since about 2016. And in that space, my role is to encounter a lot of people who are at various levels of fitness. You know, we got people who walk in who, you say, well, if you assume what CrossFit is, you have an idea of what that is. You think it's all these fit people throwing weight around. A lot of it's just grandpas like me who are walking in trying to stay fit and healthy for the rest of our lives. And I encounter people all across the different spectrum of fitness, from people who are really, just trying to lose some weight, get healthy again, to people who are, already pretty fit and are just trying to get more fit. And I've met a lot of people with a lot of different goals as a CrossFit coach. One of the ones that still confuses me is when people come to me and say, Coach, I would like to run a marathon. I don't get that one. I don't have any interest. I usually will ask them, do you know that someone is going to be chasing you for an extended period of time, 26.2 miles? Someone told you that you're in trouble and you need to learn how to run that far. And then I get more confused. Now I have some friends, yes, I'm looking at you, Steve, who every once in a while will tell me, I want to run more than a marathon. I want to run like ultra marathon. I want to run for like hours and hours. And that one really, it puzzles me. I'm like, what? Like, why do you want to run that far for that long? Why do you want to experience it? I get very perplexed. And so I'll ask questions sometimes, like, why are you doing this? And here's, some of the reasons that I hear. One reason often that's given me, I just want to prove to myself that I can do it. I just want to prove to I've got this goal, I've got this body, I get one body in this life, and I want to push my body to do something that I didn't think I would be able to do. I want to see if I can finish it. I want to see if I can accomplish it. I want to try to do something that's difficult. And part of what we're saying when we say that, right, is that if you look around at our lives, we don't live the same kind of life that people lived a couple hundred years ago. We just don't. I walked around at a friend's house a couple of months ago, walking around through like these New England stone walls, and they look beautiful. Everybody loves, this beautiful stone wall. You know what the stone wall represented? Some farmer out in his fields trying to plow that thing and coming into rocks and saying, I got to take this rock and I got to move it over somewhere. So I might as well make a wall to create some space between me and my neighbor. Now that was the way that they lived their lives. They lived their lives under adverse circumstances, difficult situations. Most of us in our day-to-day life, we don't know anything about that. And so one of the refrains that I hear sometimes from people saying, why are you doing these weird, crazy things, is I feel the need to manufacture some adversity in my life. I feel the need to make sure that my life doesn't get too soft, doesn't get too comfortable, doesn't get too lazy, doesn't get too kind of, settled down, not doing anything, even with this body that God has given me. Because life is physically less demanding of us. And so sometimes we need to find ways, and I believe in this, it's part of why I do what I do, to make life harder for us physically, so that your body can push itself to its capacity to do what it is supposed to do. But one of the things that I've observed is that people who learn how to do hard things with their bodies also learn how to do hard things in other areas of their lives. There is this connection between what we do or do not do with our bodies and what we do or do not do with our minds, with our hearts, with even our spirit man, in order to actually do the hard things that life requires of us at times. Because whether you know it or not, whether you realize it or not, life is a series of hard things, isn't it? Life is a series of hard things. And if we were to sit down and we were to talk about your life and my life and we were to share, we would find that over the course of 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, what we experience is this one, maybe a little gap, and then another hard thing. And then there's a little gap where it feels peaceful and quiet and restful. And then there seems to be another hard thing. And then most of us, at some point or another, maybe it's just me, but most of us have experienced a period in our lives where it just felt like the hard things never stopped. It was just like a series of hard things over and over and over again, one thing after another that you were trying to work through, that I was trying to work through. Some of those things are harder than others, but life, we recognize this, life is a series of hard things. You don't get to get out of this thing without working through some difficult moments in your life. But when you get through the other side of the hard things, there's something satisfying about it, isn't there? There's a reason people put the bumper sticker 26.2 on the back of their car. And I think they're crazy for it, but they're telling you something. And they're telling maybe themselves something, and maybe it's not for you because you don't even know who they are. But they're telling themselves, I can do hard things. I can push myself to accomplish, I can push myself through something that causes me some pain, some discomfort, some outside of what is actually comfortable for me living. I can push myself through some adversity into something that on the other side of it feels incredibly gratifying. It feels incredibly successful. And what you find in life that is a series of hard things is that everything that we do that involves other human beings is difficult at some point or another. Marriage is difficult. Parenting is difficult. Living in relationship with other humans is difficult. Going to work, dealing with your boss is difficult. Dealing with your coworkers is difficult. Dealing with your people inside of your church community is sometimes difficult. And here's what we're going to kind of talk about this morning. Christian community is an endurance sport. Christian community is an endurance sport. It's like choosing to run a marathon. It's like choosing to do something that's intentionally difficult because you recognize that on the other side of it, there might actually be some good rewards to sticking through the things that are difficult to get through. And you could say, well, Christian community is an endurance sport. That feels weird because we just talked for 4 weeks about how Jesus told us to love one another. And I would say, if we were all good at that, it wouldn't feel like an endurance sport. But we're not. If we were all good at when Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you, lay down your life, be willing to sacrifice yourself for the benefit of other people, if we were all doing that perfectly, it wouldn't feel so difficult. But we're not. And so we've got the rest of the New Testament to say, Jesus said, love one another. Now here's some practical stuff that tells you what you are supposed to do. Because if you are going to last in a community with other Christian, Jesus-following men and women who are committed to trying to love one another as Jesus loves us, you are going to find that there is friction. You are going to find that there are difficulties. You're going to find certain personalities that you don't click with. You're going to find certain people who believe certain things that you don't believe and that you're going to try to want to correct them on. And we're going to have to try to figure all of that out. And so here's what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 4, beginning in verse 1. He says, "So I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and with all gentleness." Now, this is Paul after having prayed this great pastoral prayer at the end of Ephesians chapter 3, that we would know the love of Christ that surpasses all knowledge, that we would be filled to overflowing with the love that God has for us and therefore the love that God has for other people and that we should therefore have for other people. And then he says, so now, in light of all of those things, in light of who you are as a Jesus-following person, in light of what it means for you to be set in a community of men and women seeking to follow Jesus, I'm asking you to walk in a way that honors the calling that Jesus has given to you. I'm asking you to walk in a way that lives up to the standard of this life that Jesus has called us into. I'm asking you to honor your identity as a Jesus-following person, shaped by the gospel, the good news of Jesus, shaped by what it means to live with Jesus as your king, to live inside of Jesus' kingdom. If you are a person who has been called by God into relationship with Him, then I want you to live as if that's who you are. I don't want you to keep living like your old life. And so the two words that he uses to describe it, he says, I want you in all humility and gentleness to live out the calling that Jesus has given to you. And those two words, humility and gentleness, should remind us of someone, right? Humility and gentleness are rooted in Jesus' character. These are things that are over and over again said about Jesus and the way that he interacts with other people. That Jesus, even though he was the king of the universe, was willing to get down and serve his disciples, tie a towel around his waist, get down and wash their feet, because he loved them that much. He had an awareness of himself in relationship with other people. And so Paul says, I want you, rooted in who Jesus is, I want you to live in humility with one another. I want you, Jesus-following people, to live with an awareness of yourself. Now, you've met people who don't have an awareness of themselves. Haven't you? They have irrational self-confidence. And they need a little dose. They need a little dose of this thing that we call humility, this thing that we call an awareness of yourself in relationship with other people, an awareness and an ability to think soberly and rightly about themselves. And in the context of Christian community, what Paul is saying, based on what Jesus said and who Jesus was, is I don't want you to think of yourself as if you are elevated above anyone else. I don't want you to think of yourself as more important, more significant, based on whatever measure you choose to use. I want you to think about yourself soberly in relationship with other people. I want you to, in fact, maybe the way to think about it, I want you to think about yourself a little bit less and think about others a little bit more. Because the gospel, if it does anything, the good news about Jesus, if it does anything, is it keeps us humble. It reminds us over and over again that we are not here, none of us. We are not here because of how good we are. We're not here because we figured it out. We're not here sitting in this room today because somehow we got our lives put together and then Jesus came and said, well, now that you got your life put together, I'll take you on my team. He came to us when we were a mess, when we were broken to various extents in our lives, and He found us, and He, by His grace and mercy, rescued us. And so none of us should look around at anyone else in the room and say, well, I'm a little bit better than you. We are all on the same level. We're all on the same plane. We should all be playing off the same page. The gospel tells us the truth about ourselves, and it's uncomfortable to hear that about ourselves sometimes. But it's necessary if we're going to live in relationship with one another in a way that honors who Jesus is. Be humble and be gentle. Or the word is the one that sometimes is translated in the Gospels, be meek with one another. Now, again, this is a word that when we hear it, sometimes it's got some wrong connotations for us, right? We hear meek and we think weak. Meekness is not weakness. Meekness is incredible power restrained by a willingness to use that power for the good of other people. That's what meekness is. Jesus was not ever weak, but Jesus was meek and gentle. And if you look through the Gospels, here's what you find. Jesus taking this incredible power and going to the people who could not speak for themselves, couldn't do for themselves, couldn't make their way into the inner sanctuaries of power and privilege and religious spaces. And Jesus keeps going to those people and in meekness and in humility keeps kneeling down in front of them and doing for them what they could not do for themselves. And Paul says now, because Jesus was humble and because Jesus was gentle, because Jesus was meek, I want you in relationship with one another to live in a way that has incredible power at your disposal because the Spirit of God lives in you. And then I want you to use it like Jesus did. I want you to lift others up rather than lifting yourselves up. I want you to, in gentleness, be a person who heals and restores other people who are made in the image of God. I want you to use the strength that you have been given, rooted in who Jesus is making you into. I want you to use that for the benefit of others. And then here's what he says. He says, so be humble, be gentle, and with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. With patience, bearing with one another. And we might hear that and we think, well, that's nice. Patience is such a nice thing. In fact, some of us have prayed for patience at different times in our lives. You have. In fact, I think all of us have at some point or another prayed for patience at different moments in our lives. And here's what we find, is that the way in which God forms patience in us is by placing us in community and in relationship with people with whom we need to be patient. Isn't that the weird thing? like the thing that we wish is that God would come to us and say, you would pray to God and say, God, I need you to give me patience. And God is going to zap you with the magic God wand and say, there you go. You've got all the patience that you could possibly need. That's not the way it works. The way that God develops patience in us is he puts us in community with other people. And then he says, now I want you to learn to endure each other. I want you to learn to bear with one another. I want you to learn what it's like to be frustrated by one another. I want you to learn what it's like to live in the inevitable challenges of dealing with human relationships with other human beings. And I want you to do this in love, not in bitterness, not in grumpiness, not in, I really don't want to do this kind of attitude that we sometimes get around ourselves and around the way that we deal with other people. Not with frustration, not with anger. Bear with one another in love. This is the way that God shapes patience inside of us. Love is that cardinal virtue. It is the thing from which everything else flows. And Jesus is inviting us to live in relationship with people who are sometimes difficult to love. And again, I don't mean that just in your family. I don't mean that just in your workplace and in your school, in those environments. I mean in this environment right here. We are difficult to love sometimes. I know you're not, but I am. I know you're not, but she is. What Jesus is inviting us to do in community with one another is to patiently endure with other people even when we don't understand what they're doing or why they're doing it. Have you ever looked at someone and said, I don't understand. I just don't get it. Why are you doing that? Why are you making that decision? And then some of us, when we experience that tension, we feel the need. You know where this is going. Some of us, as soon as we see that, we feel the need to not only think it, right, but then to also say it. And sometimes when we say it, it doesn't come out like, I love you and I want the best for you. Sometimes it comes out like, why are you such an idiot? I mean, let's just be honest, right? Again, I know that you don't ever do that, but other people do that. Like, I know that you would never think that inside your heart or inside of your mind, but other people would think that inside of their hearts and inside of their minds. And Jesus is saying, look, if you're going to live in community with each other, you've got to resist that impulse inside of you. You got to push that back. You've got to bear with one another. You've got to learn how to be patient and endure with one another. This is not a flowery virtue that Paul is encouraging us into. This is difficult. Running a marathon, I've never done it, don't intend to do it. From what I've heard, is difficult. It pushes your body to places that it does not want to go. Endurance is hard. It is not an easy thing. It stretches us. It makes us incredibly uncomfortable. And God is saying, I am putting you in community with one another so that you will learn how to bear with one another in patience, because endurance is an act of your will shaped by your love. It is an act of your will shaped by your love for Jesus and your love for Jesus' people. It is a decision that you make to bear with one another. It's a decision that you make to say, this doesn't feel like it's working. This person just seems to rub me the wrong way every time we get together, and I don't know what it is, and it makes me so uncomfortable. And everything inside of us in moments like that wants to run in the other direction. And Paul is saying, and Jesus is saying, don't run away from that, because where else are you going to learn to be shaped, to be patient, and endure in your love with other people than by staying in things that are difficult? Where else are you going to learn it? And a much more famous passage that you probably know because you hear it all the time at different places, weddings generally. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and love endures all things. Love is gentle. Love is kind. We believe in all of those things. Love is also willing to bear with the other person. Love is willing to be uncomfortable. And bearing with one another, like training for a marathon, is not something that you do and decide to do when the moment strikes. We prepare for it ahead of time. In order to endure with one another, we make a decision in advance that when the trial of our patience comes, we are going to choose to bear with one another. We must decide to endure before the test arrives. If you are waiting for the moment that God says, okay, you need to endure this, to say, okay, God, give me patience and let me endure this, it's too late. It's over. If you're not ready for it when it arrives, if you haven't decided ahead of time, I'm willing to endure through this before the test arrives, it is too late for you to train for it when the difficult moment arrives right in front of you. And so what Paul is saying, and I think what we're trying to say to one another, is every single day learn in little ways to bear with one another. Train yourself to be uncomfortable in situations and circumstances that you don't like and that you don't feel good about. Dealing with difficult people in community with one another is not a question of if this is going to happen. It is absolutely 100% a question of when. When this happens, what will you do? How will you respond? When it's difficult to get along, how will you react? True love strengthens our resolve to continue even when it's difficult. And what Paul says is if you bear with one another with patience out of your humility and gentleness with one another, then what you do is you keep the bond of peace and the unity of the Spirit inside of this group and inside of this place. And what we need as people of God is the ability to bear with one another so that over time, God can actually do the work of uniting our hearts, knitting us together, and allowing us to experience the bond of peace in relationship with one another. The unity of the Spirit is formed by God's work inside of us when we endure with one another. So that at least in part, what's supposed to be happening in relationship here is that we are protecting our unity as the people of God. We're protecting the unity of the people of God by choosing to bear with one another, by choosing to be patient when we don't understand, by choosing to work through difficult circumstances with other people. And bearing with one another creates unity, not uniformity. See, what we think is that if everyone looked, thought, felt, believed, acted exactly the same way, that would be unity. That's not unity. That's uniformity. That's everybody doing the same thing at the same time in the same way. That's not God's design for Christian community. It's not all of us marching in lockstep with one another. In fact, it's, sometimes us all, kind of with different drummers, beating to different drummers and all of us walking in different ways and us learning in the middle of that, how do we come to a place where we sense and experience unity? Here's what's not ever going to happen inside of this church or any other church that you will ever belong in. There is never going to be full agreement on everything. It's not. This is not going to happen. If you're waiting for unity, for all of us to think the same way, you're going to be waiting for a long time. If you are waiting for all of us to believe exactly the same thing about everything that we believe, you're going to be waiting for a long time. Now, I think we have unity around the big things, and I think that's incredibly important. But it does mean that we're going to have some things that we are not going to agree on. There are going to be some ways that we think. There's going to be even some ways that we think we should behave, some things that we should do that we are not going to agree on. We are going to frustrate one another. We are going to annoy one another. We are going to bother one another at different moments, at different times in our lives because we are human people. And in the middle of all of that, God is saying, I still want you to love each other, and I want you to bear with each other, and I want you to endure with one another, and I want you to be patient with one another, and I want you to protect the unity of the Spirit that exists inside of this place. And now here's the thing, right? Like there are moments that you can feel that. When we come together and we worship and we sing, and every once in a while, there's those moments where I can hear the voices and I can hear everybody kind of coming together, and it's almost like you're like, I feel that sense of we are in this together. But that's not all the time. That's not every moment. Now, what this doesn't mean is that we let things slide with one another, because that's one misapplication of bearing with one another. We just say, well, you just grin and bear it. You don't ever say anything. That's not true. Sometimes bearing with one another requires hard, difficult conversations. It absolutely does. I told you at the beginning, it is an endurance sport. It is not an easy thing. This is not flowery virtues that Paul is saying, I want you to just, bear with one another. No, that's hard to do. There is going to be friction between us at times, which is going to sand off some of your rough edges and some of my rough edges. And that needs to happen for us to be shaped into the people that Jesus wants us to be. There's some stuff, I hate to break it to you, but there's some stuff in you that needs to get sanded off. There's some stuff about me that needs to get sanded off. There's some ways that I tend to think, act, behave, things that I say, things that I do that I don't mean to do, or that sometimes I do mean to do, that need to get sanded off. And you're the reason, you're part of the way that God does it. Now, sometimes you're also the reason. That was a slip. Sometimes you're the reason. Sometimes I'm the reason. Right? It requires friction. It requires difficulty. But when we try to do it humbly, in gentleness, rooted in Jesus' character, out of love for one another, with patient endurance, then that's what living in peace and unity requires of us. It begins with love, all of them do, and it follows through with bearing with one another through the struggles of being in community with each other, rather than giving up in the middle. And again, I think this is one of those things that just sometimes happens in churches. We get to a place where it gets difficult, it's not as easy as it was, and sometimes the first response is, well, I'll just leave and find another place. Just leave and go there. And that is, in a lot of ways, a very modern problem. Because a few hundred years ago even, you didn't have a bunch of different churches. You had one. And you sat with those people. And you, to some extent or another, learned how to bear with one another, around each other, and work through some things. Now, I don't think they did it perfectly, but I think they did it maybe better than we do. And we could learn some of that. It can be avoided if you just want surface. It can be avoided. You don't have to bear with anybody if you don't ever go past just top level of people's lives. But if we're going to live in love with one another, the way that Jesus invites us to, then it's going to be difficult at times. We're going to have to learn how to bear with and work through those disagreements and those moments together. You're going to have to learn, and I'm going to have to learn how to get your rough edges sanded off. And then as we do, what we believe is God is bringing us together, uniting us together as the people of God. As the people of God, bonded together in unity by the Spirit who lives among us. And it will always be better when we do. Would you pray with me this morning? And we're going to sing. Heavenly Father, I'm grateful for this church and this community and this group of men and women, these people that are sitting here in this room today who have been part of just making my life look more like yours. And that has not always been easy. It's not always been comfortable. But it has always been good. And so I pray for this group, this community, people who are sitting in the room, the people who are not here today for any number of other reasons, but are part of this community. I pray that you would draw us together in patient love and endurance together. That you would strengthen the unity of the Spirit among us, and a bond of peace would exist in this place with this people that would truly honor you, truly speak of your love and your compassion for us. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.